Welcome aboard the Bedtime Express, where every journey leads to deep sleep and peaceful dreams. Settle in comfortably as we journey through the mists of time to uncover the gentle mysteries of the Knights Templar and their legendary treasures. Let your mind drift back nearly 900 years to an age of stone castles and flickering candlelight, where secrets were whispered in shadowy corridors and legends were born in the quiet hours of dawn. Before you fall asleep, please subscribe to our channel so you can come back tomorrow for another deep sleep journey. Also, leave us like and write into comments what kind of bedtime stories you like most. Now close your eyes and breathe deeply, allowing the soft rhythm of this ancient tale to carry you toward peaceful slumber as we explore one of history's most enduring mysteries. The real story behind the Knights Templar's treasures. In the year 1119, when the world moved at the pace of horse hooves on cobblestone and the scent of frankincense drifted through cathedral halls, 9 knights gathered in the holy city of Jerusalem. The morning light filtered through narrow windows as these men, led by a French nobleman named Hugues de Payens, knelt in prayer before making a vow that would echo through the centuries. Their faces, weathered by years of warfare and pilgrimage, reflected a determination that went far beyond simple military duty. These were men who had seen the face of death on countless battlefields, yet they sought something greater than earthly glory or temporal power. The city of Jerusalem hummed with the soft murmur of pilgrims, their footsteps worn smooth into the ancient stones by countless faithful souls seeking redemption. Merchants hawked their wares in narrow alleyways where shadows danced with the flicker of oil lamps, their voices creating a gentle symphony that had echoed through these streets for 1,000 years. The air itself seemed thick with history, carrying the whispered prayers of generations and the faint echo of ancient rituals performed in temples that had crumbled to dust long before these Christian knights arrived. These 9 knights, their chain mail glinting softly in the golden light of the Holy Land, approached King Baldwin II of Jerusalem with a humble request that would change the course of history. They wished to form a brotherhood dedicated to protecting the pilgrims who traveled the dangerous roads to the Holy Land, often falling prey to bandits who lurked in the shadows of rocky valleys and desert passes like wolves waiting for unwary travelers. Their voices, when they spoke of their mission, carried the quiet conviction of men who had found their true calling in service to something greater than themselves. The king, moved by their pious intentions and perhaps sensing something extraordinary in these weathered warriors, granted them quarters in the most sacred of places, atop the Temple Mount, in the ruins of what they believed to be Solomon's Temple. Imagine, if you will, the wonder these knights felt as they walked where ancient kings once trod, where legends spoke of unimaginable riches hidden deep beneath the earth. The very stones seemed to whisper secrets of ages past, of golden arks and sacred vessels that had vanished into the mists of history like morning dew before the rising sun. Each footstep they took echoed with the weight of millennia, connecting them to a chain of sacred tradition that stretched back to the very dawn of civilization. For 9 long years, these poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, as they came to be known, lived in apparent poverty and dedication. They wore simple white robes that grew soft with age and constant wear, shared horses between 2 knights in a display of humble brotherhood, and ate their meals in contemplative silence that spoke volumes about their inner discipline. Their days began before dawn with prayers that rose like incense toward the heavens and ended long after sunset with quiet meditation on the mysteries of faith. To the casual observer, they appeared to be nothing more than another small religious order, dedicated but unremarkable in a land filled with such brotherhoods. Yet, during these quiet years, strange rumors began to circulate like morning mist through the narrow streets of Jerusalem. Local merchants, their eyes sharp from years of watching for profit and danger, spoke in hushed tones of mysterious excavations beneath the Temple Mount. Night watchmen, making their rounds through the sleeping city, reported the soft sounds of digging and the gentle clink of tools against stone echoing through the darkness like the whispered secrets of the earth itself. What were these devoted knights seeking in the depths below, working by torchlight while the city slept above them? Some whispered they searched for the Ark of the Covenant, that golden chest that once held the stone tablets given to Moses on Mount Sinai, its power said to be so great that none could look upon it and live. Others spoke of Solomon's vast treasures, hidden away before the temple's destruction centuries before, when the king's wealth was said to rival that of entire empires. Still others suggested they sought something even more precious, ancient scrolls containing wisdom that had been lost to the world, knowledge that could unlock the very secrets of creation itself. The knights themselves remained silent about their activities, their faces serene as morning lakes as they went about their daily prayers and duties. When questioned by curious visitors or concerned local authorities, they would simply smile with the patient kindness of men who had found peace in their calling, speaking only of their dedication to protecting pilgrims and serving God. But those who watched them closely noticed subtle changes as the years passed, a certain confidence in their bearing, a depth in their eyes that suggested they had seen wonders beyond ordinary understanding. The excavations themselves were conducted with remarkable skill and discretion, using techniques that seemed advanced even by the standards of experienced miners. The knights created a network of tunnels and chambers that honeycombed the bedrock beneath the ancient temple site. They worked in shifts, some standing guard, while others descended into the earth with picks and shovels, their movements coordinated with the precision of a military operation. The soil and stones they removed were disposed of so carefully that even the most observant neighbors could not determine where such large quantities of material had gone. As they dug deeper into the living rock, following passages that seemed to have been carved by ancient hands, the knights began to uncover chambers that had been sealed for centuries. These rooms, preserved by the dry climate and careful construction, contained artifacts and documents that would reshape their understanding of history itself. Stone vessels filled with scrolls written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and languages that had been forgotten by all but the most learned scholars lay waiting in the darkness, like sleeping secrets ready to awaken. The first major discovery came in their third year of excavation, when a carefully concealed entrance led them into a vast chamber that had once served as a treasury for the ancient temple. The walls were lined with niches that had once held precious objects, and though most had been emptied long ago, the knights found fragments and clues that suggested the original contents had been of extraordinary value. More importantly, they discovered that this chamber was only the beginning. Passages led deeper still, into a labyrinth of rooms and corridors that seemed to extend far beneath the city itself. Among the artifacts they uncovered were implements of worship whose purposes were initially mysterious to the Christian knights. Bronze vessels inscribed with symbols that predated the Hebrew alphabet, stone tablets covered with astronomical calculations of breathtaking complexity, and ritual objects that seemed to bridge the gap between ancient pagan traditions and the monotheistic faith that had replaced them. Each discovery raised new questions about the nature of the divine and the continuity of sacred wisdom across the centuries. But change was coming, as inevitable as the turning of seasons. In 1129, Hugues de Payens departed for Europe, leaving behind the dusty streets of Jerusalem for the green hills of France. What he carried with him in carefully guarded chests and sealed pouches would transform not just his small brotherhood, but the very fabric of medieval society. The journey itself was fraught with danger, as the precious cargo attracted the attention of bandits and rivals who sensed that something of extraordinary value was being transported across the treacherous roads of the medieval world. The transformation in Hugues de Payens was remarkable to those who had known him before his departure for the Holy Land. Once a relatively minor noble with modest holdings, he now spoke with the authority of a man who possessed secrets that could change the world. His bearing had acquired a dignity that impressed even the most powerful lords of France, and his eyes held a depth of knowledge that suggested he had looked upon wonders beyond ordinary human experience. When he spoke of his Brotherhood's mission, his words carried a conviction that moved hardened warriors to tears and inspired wealthy nobles to donate vast sums to the Templar cause. At the Council of Troyes, gathered in a great hall where tapestries depicted scenes of biblical wonder, and the assembled clergy represented the highest authorities of the Christian world, the Church officially recognized the Knights Templar. Bernard of Clairvaux, a man whose words carried the weight of divine authority and whose influence extended to the very throne of the Pope himself, praised these warrior monks and helped craft their rule, a document that would govern their lives for nearly 2 centuries. The simple white robes gained a distinctive red cross, a symbol that would become known from the shores of Portugal to the walls of Acre, marking the bearers as members of an order that enjoyed papal protection and royal favor. The rule that governed Templar life was unlike anything that had been seen before in medieval Europe. It combined the discipline of monastic life with the practical requirements of military service, creating a hybrid organization that was simultaneously a religious order and an elite fighting force. The knights took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, yet they were also trained warriors who could hold their own against the finest cavalry in the world. This combination of spiritual dedication and martial prowess would prove to be one of their greatest strengths in the centuries to come. But perhaps most remarkably of all, these once poor knights returned to the Holy Land transformed by wealth that seemed to flow like an endless spring. Gone were the days of sharing horses and simple meals, replaced by an organization that could afford the finest weapons, the strongest fortifications, and the most advanced military equipment available in the medieval world. Suddenly, they possessed gold to build mighty fortresses that dominated entire regions, silver to outfit vast armies that could challenge the forces of Muslim rulers, and resources that would make them the most powerful military order in Christendom. The transformation was so dramatic, so sudden, that even kings began to take notice. Monarchs who had previously regarded the Templars as a minor religious curiosity now found themselves dealing with an organization that possessed wealth and influence that rivaled their own royal treasuries. The speed of this change raised questions that would echo through the centuries. Where had this vast wealth come from? And what secrets had the knights discovered during their years of quiet excavation beneath the Temple Mount? What had they discovered beneath those ancient stones that had remained hidden for so many centuries? The mystery deepened like evening shadows as the Templars began their rise to unprecedented power, their newfound wealth enabling them to construct a network of castles, churches, and commanderies that would span the known world. Each building they erected seemed to incorporate architectural principles and design elements that were far advanced for their time, suggesting access to engineering knowledge that had been lost to the world for centuries. The first whispers of their treasure began not with gold or silver, but with knowledge that seemed to transcend the limitations of their age. Ancient texts, some said, written in languages that had been forgotten by all but the most learned scholars, containing wisdom that had been preserved from the very dawn of civilization. Maps that showed routes to places that existed only in legend, revealing trade connections and geographical knowledge that would not be officially discovered for centuries to come. And perhaps most precious of all, secrets that could shake the very foundations of the church they served so faithfully, knowledge that could rewrite the history of the world itself. As the candles burned low in their Jerusalem headquarters, casting dancing shadows on stone walls that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the Templars began to weave a network that would span continents. From the windswept shores of Scotland to the sun-baked hills of Cyprus, from the bustling ports of Venice to the foggy moors of England, their white mantles with red crosses became a symbol of safety for pilgrims and merchants alike. But more than that, they became the bearers of secrets that would influence the course of human civilization in ways that are still being discovered today. The transformation of these 9 humble knights into the guardians of mysteries that would outlive kingdoms and outlast dynasties marks one of the most remarkable chapters in human history. What began as a simple mission to protect pilgrims had evolved into something far greater, a quest to preserve and protect knowledge that could change the world. The treasures they guarded were far more than mere gold and jewels. They were the keepers of secrets that connected the ancient world to the modern age, bridges across time that carried the wisdom of ages into an uncertain future. As the first chapter of our tale draws to a close, imagine those early knights working by torchlight in chambers that had been sealed since before Christ walked the earth. Picture their wonder as they uncovered scrolls that contained astronomical calculations more accurate than anything known to medieval science. Their awe as they discovered engineering principles that would not be understood by mainstream scholars for centuries to come. These men, who had begun their quest with nothing but faith and determination, had become the guardians of humanity's greatest treasures, not gold or silver, but knowledge itself. Sleep now, gentle listener, and dream of those early days when faith and mystery walked hand in hand through the narrow streets of the holy city. Let your mind drift to those candle-lit chambers where ancient secrets were carefully preserved for future generations, where 9 humble knights became the guardians of wisdom that would outlive empires. Tomorrow, our story continues with the rise of the Templars to heights of power that would make them the envy of kings and the target of those who feared what they might know. As dawn breaks over our continuing tale, painting the ancient stones of Jerusalem with the soft gold of morning light, we find ourselves drawn deeper into the labyrinthine mysteries that surrounded the Knights Templar's most sacred possessions. The morning light reveals not just the physical treasures that filled their vaults, but the profound knowledge that transformed a small band of warrior monks into the most influential organization in medieval Europe. Like archaeologists of the spirit, we must dig carefully through layers of legend and history to uncover the true nature of what they discovered in those hidden chambers beneath the Temple Mount. Beneath the Temple Mount, where the original 9 knights had spent those mysterious first years of excavation, lay a network of tunnels and chambers that predated even Solomon's magnificent temple by centuries or perhaps millennia. These ancient spaces, carved from living rock by hands that had crumbled to dust long before the first stones of the temple were laid, held secrets that would reshape the Templars' understanding of the divine and their place in the cosmic order. The very air in these chambers seemed thick with the weight of ages, carrying whispers of civilizations that had vanished so completely that their names were forgotten even in the oldest chronicles. In the flickering light of oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on walls covered with inscriptions, the knights discovered writings in Hebrew, Aramaic, and older tongues that scholars of their time could barely comprehend. These texts were not mere historical curiosities, but living documents that contained practical knowledge about subjects ranging from astronomy to metallurgy, from medicine to architecture. Each scroll they unrolled revealed new wonders, new insights into the nature of reality that challenged everything they thought they knew about the world and their place within it. The most remarkable discovery, according to whispered legends passed down through generations of initiates who had sworn blood oaths to protect these secrets, was a series of copper scrolls hidden within sealed stone vessels that had been placed in the deepest and most secure chambers. These scrolls, green with age and carefully preserved by techniques that demonstrated knowledge of chemistry far advanced for their supposed antiquity, contained detailed descriptions of the temple's construction, complete with measurements, architectural secrets, and most intriguingly, the locations of hidden chambers where the temple's most precious artifacts had been concealed before the Babylonian destruction. The scrolls described not just the physical structure of Solomon's temple, but the metaphysical principles that governed its construction. They revealed that the temple had been designed as a 3-dimensional representation of cosmic order, its proportions and orientations carefully calculated to create a sacred space that served as a bridge between earthly and divine realms. Every measurement, every angle, every decorative element had been chosen according to mathematical principles that reflected the fundamental harmonies underlying all of creation. From these ancient texts, the Templars learned of sacred geometry, the divine mathematics that govern the construction of holy places and the very structure of reality itself. They discovered that the golden ratio That mystical proportion found in everything from seashells to galaxies had been consciously incorporated into the temple's design as a key to unlocking deeper spiritual truths. The significance of certain numbers, 7, 12, 13, and others, was revealed not as superstition, but as reflections of mathematical relationships that governed both the movement of celestial bodies and the growth of living organisms. The harmonic relationships that connected earthly architecture to celestial movements became a central focus of Templar study and practice. They learned that buildings constructed according to these principles could actually channel and focus spiritual energies, creating spaces where prayer and meditation became more effective, where healing could be accelerated, and where the barriers between physical and spiritual realms became thin and permeable. This knowledge transformed their understanding of architecture from mere construction technique into a sacred art that could influence the very fabric of reality. This wisdom transformed the way the Templars built their own structures, infusing even the most practical military fortifications with spiritual significance and power. Their commanderies and churches began to incorporate these sacred proportions, creating buildings that seemed to resonate with an otherworldly harmony that visitors could feel even if they couldn't understand its source. The round churches they favored, inspired by the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, but incorporating far more ancient design principles, were constructed using mathematical relationships that their contemporaries viewed as almost magical in their perfection and beauty. Visitors to these Templar structures often remarked on the profound sense of peace and transcendence they felt within these spaces, as if the very stones had been arranged to channel divine energy and create a sanctuary from the chaos and violence of the medieval world. Many reported experiencing visions, sudden insights, or profound spiritual experiences while praying in these buildings, effects that the Templars attributed to the proper application of sacred geometric principles in their construction. The buildings themselves became tools of spiritual transformation, designed to elevate the consciousness of all who entered them. But the Templars' treasure trove of knowledge extended far beyond architecture into realms that would not be explored by mainstream European scholars for centuries to come. In their Jerusalem excavations, they reportedly uncovered star charts and astronomical calculations of breathtaking accuracy, documents that revealed an understanding of celestial mechanics that would not be matched in Europe until the time of Copernicus and Kepler. These ancient astronomers had mapped the heavens with a precision that seemed impossible given the crude instruments supposedly available in antiquity. Yet the evidence of their knowledge was undeniable. The Templars learned to navigate by stars whose names were forgotten by contemporary scholars, to predict eclipses and planetary alignments with accuracy that amazed even the most learned men of their time, and to understand the cosmic forces that their ancestors believed influenced earthly events in ways both subtle and profound. They discovered that the ancients had possessed a sophisticated understanding of astronomical cycles, including precession of the equinoxes and long-term planetary movements that modern astronomy had only recently rediscovered. This knowledge gave them practical advantages in navigation and agriculture, but also provided them with a cosmic perspective that influenced their spiritual and philosophical worldview. Perhaps most revolutionary of all was their discovery of advanced engineering techniques that seemed almost impossible for any pre-modern civilization to have developed. The scrolls contained detailed descriptions of construction methods that challenged everything medieval engineers thought they knew about building: how to move massive stones without the machinery that modern builders take for granted, how to create structures that could withstand earthquakes and sieges that would destroy conventional buildings, and how to design water systems that could supply entire cities with fresh water transported across vast distances. These techniques included knowledge of leverage systems, pulley arrangements, and counterweight mechanisms that could multiply human strength by factors that seemed almost supernatural to medieval observers. The ancients had also mastered methods of stone cutting and fitting that created joints so precise that not even a knife blade could be inserted between the blocks, resulting in structures of incredible durability and stability. Most remarkably of all, they had developed techniques for quarrying, transporting, and positioning stones, weighing hundreds of tons, using methods that modern engineers are still struggling to understand and replicate. These engineering principles would later enable the Templars to build some of the most impressive fortifications in the Holy Land, castles that stood as testaments to their technical prowess and served as seemingly impregnable bastions of Christian power in hostile territory. Their fortresses incorporated design innovations that were centuries ahead of their time, including advanced defensive systems that maximized the effectiveness of limited numbers of defenders and supply networks that could sustain sieges lasting years rather than months. These castles became legendary for their strength and sophistication, with some remaining intact and functional to this day. The financial innovations that made the Templars legendary throughout Europe also had their roots in ancient wisdom discovered in those hidden chambers beneath Jerusalem. Among the documents they found were contracts and commercial agreements that revealed sophisticated banking practices from Solomon's time, when the temple had served not just as a place of worship, but as the economic heart of the ancient kingdom. These documents showed that ancient merchants had developed techniques for facilitating trade across vast distances, managing currency exchanges between different monetary systems, and providing credit arrangements that enabled commercial ventures spanning multiple kingdoms and cultures. The temple's economic records revealed a level of commercial sophistication that rivaled anything known in medieval Europe, with evidence of complex international trade networks, standardized weights and measures, and accounting systems that track transactions with remarkable precision and reliability. The ancient bankers had developed methods for verifying the authenticity of precious metals, creating letters of credit that could be honored across vast distances, and managing investment portfolios that balanced risk and return with mathematical precision. Drawing on these ancient models, the Templars developed what would become the first truly international banking system since the fall of the Roman Empire. A pilgrim could deposit silver in London and withdraw gold in Jerusalem, all guaranteed by the integrity and financial resources of the order, which had grown to encompass assets that rivaled those of entire kingdoms. They created letters of credit that eliminated the need for travelers to carry large amounts of precious metals on dangerous journeys, established exchange rates between different currencies that facilitated international trade, and developed accounting methods that tracked transactions across their vast network of properties with unprecedented accuracy. This financial acumen generated enormous wealth that flowed into Templar coffers like a golden river, but it also made them indispensable to kings and merchants throughout Europe and the Middle East, who came to depend on their services for everything from funding military campaigns to facilitating commercial ventures. The reliability of Templar financial services became legendary, with their word being accepted as readily as gold throughout the known world. This financial power, however, would eventually contribute to their downfall, as envious rulers began to see them as a threat to royal authority and a tempting target for confiscation. Yet, among all these treasures of knowledge and technique, the most closely guarded secrets concerned matters of faith and theology that touched on the very foundations of Christian belief. The Templars claimed to have discovered texts that shed new light on the life and teachings of Christ, documents that painted a more complete picture of early Christianity than had survived in official church records, which had been edited and revised by successive councils and papal authorities. These writings, they believed, contained the true essence of Christian mysticism, practices and beliefs that had been preserved in the depths of the temple since the earliest days of the faith, before political considerations had influenced the development of Orthodox doctrine. Some scholars and historians suggest that the Templars found evidence of connections between Christianity and other ancient wisdom traditions, Egyptian mysteries that predated the pharaohs, Gnostic teachings that emphasized direct personal experience of the divine, and esoteric practices that had been branded as heretical by Orthodox Christianity, but which might represent authentic spiritual traditions with roots in the very earliest days of human civilization. If true, this knowledge would have placed them in an extraordinarily delicate position, possessing truths that could challenge the very foundations of the church they served, while being bound by oaths of loyalty that prevented them from revealing what they had learned. The tension between their discoveries and their official duties created a complex web of secrecy and discretion that characterized all Templar activities. They had to balance their commitment to truth and knowledge against their obligations to the Church and their role as Christian warriors in the Holy Land. This balancing act required extraordinary skill and wisdom as they navigated between the demands of orthodoxy and the implications of what they had discovered in those ancient chambers beneath Jerusalem. The physical treasures that captured popular imagination, the golden vessels, precious stones, and ornate religious artifacts, were indeed substantial and impressive beyond the dreams of most medieval observers. Contemporary accounts describe temple treasuries overflowing with wealth that dazzled even the most jaded observers who had seen the riches of kings and emperors. Chalices carved from single emeralds that caught and reflected light like captured starlight, crosses studded with sapphires and rubies that seemed to glow with inner fire, and religious relics housed in cases of the finest gold and silver, worked by master craftsmen whose skills seemed almost supernatural. But these material riches, impressive as they were and valuable beyond measure, paled in comparison to the intellectual and spiritual treasures that truly set the Templars apart from every other organization of their time. The gold and jewels could be stolen, the precious metals could be melted down and reformed, but the knowledge they had acquired was permanent and indestructible, capable of being transmitted across generations and surviving the destruction of any earthly kingdom or empire. This knowledge represented humanity's greatest achievement, the accumulated wisdom of ages preserved against the darkness of ignorance and the chaos of war. As evening falls over this chapter of our story, picture the Templar scholars bent over ancient parchments in candle-lit chambers deep beneath the holy city, their faces illuminated by the soft glow as they decoded secrets that had waited centuries for rediscovery. These warrior monks had become something unprecedented in human history, a fusion of military might, financial power, and esoteric knowledge that would shape the course of European civilization in ways that are still being discovered and understood today. They were living bridges between the ancient world and the modern age, preserving treasures that were far more valuable than any material wealth. The treasure they guarded was not merely wealth in the conventional sense, but wisdom itself, the accumulated knowledge of ages that could transform both individual souls and entire societies. In their careful hands, these secrets would remain protected for nearly 2 centuries, influencing everything from Gothic architecture to international commerce, from navigation techniques to mystical practices that would inspire generations of seekers long after the order itself had been destroyed. They had become the keepers of humanity's greatest inheritance, guardians of knowledge that connected the dawn of civilization to its ultimate destiny. Rest now, and let your dreams carry you through those ancient corridors where candlelight revealed wonders that kings could barely imagine and treasures that emperors could never possess. Feel the weight of centuries pressing down on those stone chambers, and sense the awesome responsibility that these knights had taken upon themselves to preserve knowledge that could change the world. Our journey continues tomorrow with the golden age of Templar power, when their influence reached from the courts of Europe to the furthest outposts of the Crusader kingdoms, and their secrets began to reshape the medieval world in ways both visible and hidden. The 13th century dawned like a golden sunrise over the Templar domains, illuminating an empire that stretched across the known world with the soft gleam of morning light on polished armor and the warm glow of prosperity that comes from knowledge properly applied. From the mist-shrouded hills of Scotland to the sun-drenched shores of Cyprus, from the bustling ports of Venice to the wind-swept plains of Hungary, the white banners bearing the distinctive Red Cross fluttered in countless keeps and commanderies, each one a stronghold of secrets that connected to form the most sophisticated network the medieval world had ever seen. This was more than just a military order or religious brotherhood. It had become a shadow empire that operated according to principles and possessed knowledge that set it apart from every other institution of its time. In the great Templar preceptory of Paris, where the morning bells called the brothers to prayer in voices that had echoed across the city for generations, the treasure chambers held wealth that would make modern billionaires weep with envy and despair at their own poverty. But these vaults, carved deep into the living rock beneath the city, and protected by locks and mechanisms that incorporated principles of engineering that would not be understood by mainstream science for centuries, contained far more than the glittering gold and silver that captured contemporary imaginations and inspired the envy of kings. Here, in climate-controlled chambers that demonstrated the Templars' advanced understanding of preservation techniques learned from ancient texts, were stored the accumulated wisdom of civilizations that had risen and fallen before the first stones of Rome were laid. Scrolls from Alexandria's great library, saved from the flames that had consumed that wonder of the ancient world, contained the mathematical and astronomical knowledge of Greek scholars whose understanding of the cosmos would not be matched in Europe for 1,000 years. Astronomical instruments from Cordoba, crafted by Muslim scholars who had preserved and expanded upon the knowledge of antiquity, sat beside alchemical texts from Baghdad that revealed the secrets of transforming base metals into gold and discovering the elixir of life. Maps filled entire chambers, their parchment surfaces covered with details that showed trade routes to lands that most Europeans believed existed only in fables and legends told by wandering merchants seeking to impress credulous listeners. These charts revealed the true extent of the world's geography centuries before Columbus would claim to have discovered new lands, showing shipping lanes across oceans that official history insisted were unknown, and marking the locations of gold mines, spice gardens, and precious gem deposits that lay far beyond the supposed boundaries of the known world. The Templars had inherited or discovered geographical knowledge that made them masters of global trade at a time when most people believed the earth was flat and that sailing too far from shore would result in falling off the edge of creation. The Templars had become the medieval world's equivalent of a multinational corporation, with interests that spanned continents and influenced the policies of nations in ways that most rulers never fully understood. Their fleet of ships, some of the largest and most advanced vessels of their time, incorporated design innovations that would not be seen in other navies for centuries, hull shapes that cut through water with unprecedented efficiency, sail configurations that could harness winds that other vessels couldn't use, and navigation instruments that allowed them to sail safely in weather conditions that would force other ships to seek shelter. These ships served not just as transportation for pilgrims and warriors, but also functioned as a clandestine network for transporting their most precious secrets between far-flung outposts scattered across 3 continents. Flying flags that granted them safe passage in ports from Genoa to Acre, from London to Constantinople, these vessels became floating repositories of knowledge, carrying ancient texts, rare minerals, exotic technologies, and mysterious artifacts between their commanderies with a regularity and security that amazed contemporary observers. The sight of a Templar ship entering harbor was always a cause for excitement, as merchants and scholars alike knew that these vessels carried goods and knowledge that could not be found anywhere else in the world. In England, the Templars had established themselves as the kingdom's unofficial bankers, with vaults beneath the Temple Church in London that held not only the crown jewels, but also served as the royal treasury for kings who trusted Templar security more than their own palace guards. The round church itself, modeled on the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, but incorporating sacred geometric principles discovered in their ancient texts, served as both a place of worship and a symbol of their unique position in English society. Kings who borrowed from the Templars found themselves not just indebted financially, but also dependent on an organization that seemed to possess an almost supernatural understanding of politics, economics, and military strategy that gave them advantages no other advisors could provide. The knowledge that flowed through Templar networks often reached the ears of monarchs before their own spies could gather intelligence, creating a web of influence that extended into every royal court in Europe like invisible threads connecting the powerful to those who truly understood power. Templar advisors, their white mantles marking them as members of an order that transcended national boundaries, could be found whispering counsel into the ears of kings from Portugal to Poland, from Scotland to Sicily. Their ability to predict political upheavals, economic trends, and military movements seemed almost prophetic to contemporary observers who had no idea of the vast intelligence network that gathered information from every corner of the known world. The Portuguese Templars had discovered sea routes that would not be officially found by other explorers for another 2 centuries. Using navigational techniques learned from ancient texts and perfected through careful observation of celestial movements and ocean currents. Following star charts that had been preserved since the time of the Phoenicians, they established trading posts along the African coast and may have reached the Americas long before Columbus ever dreamed of sailing west in search of the Indies. The wealth that flowed from these secret expeditions, exotic spices worth their weight in gold, precious metals in quantities that seemed impossible, and rare gems that had never been seen in European markets, was carefully channeled through their financial networks to fund their expanding operations while maintaining the fiction of their humble origins. In the hidden laboratories within their commanderies, accessible only to the most trusted brothers who had proven their discretion through years of faithful service, Templar alchemists worked with knowledge that seemed to border on magic to their contemporaries who had never imagined that such transformations were possible. They had mastered techniques for purifying metals to degrees of purity that would not be achieved by mainstream metallurgy for centuries, creating alloys of extraordinary strength and beauty that incorporated elements unknown to conventional smiths. Their workshops produced chemicals that could preserve organic materials for centuries without decay, create flames that burned underwater, and produce substances that could eat through the strongest steel while leaving gold untouched. These alchemical skills, derived from ancient Egyptian and Greek texts discovered in their excavations beneath Jerusalem, allowed them to create weapons and armor of superior quality that gave their warriors advantages that seemed almost supernatural on medieval battlefields. Templar swords held edges that never dulled. Their mail was lighter yet stronger than anything their enemies possessed, and their shields could turn aside blows that would shatter ordinary defenses. More mysteriously, they produced substances that could heal wounds with remarkable speed, cure diseases that other physicians considered hopeless, and even extend human life far beyond its normal span, through methods that they guarded more jealously than their greatest treasures. The medical knowledge preserved in Templar archives rivaled that of the best universities of their time and surpassed the understanding of most contemporary physicians by such a margin that their healing abilities were often attributed to divine intervention rather than superior knowledge. Drawing on texts that combined Greek, Arabic, Hebrew, and even more ancient medical traditions that predated all known civilizations, their physician brothers could perform surgical procedures that other healers considered impossible and cure ailments that were universally regarded as fatal. They understood the circulation of blood centuries before William Harvey would be credited with its discovery, knew the importance of cleanliness in treating wounds at a time when most physicians believed that pus was a sign of healthy healing, and possessed pharmaceutical knowledge that included the use of substances from distant lands that most Europeans had never heard of, and whose very existence was doubted by learned men. Their medical libraries contained detailed anatomical drawings that showed the human body with accuracy that would not be matched until the Renaissance, and their understanding of disease transmission led them to develop quarantine procedures that could halt epidemics in their tracks. This medical expertise not only saved countless lives among their own brothers and the populations they served, but also provided them with another source of influence and revenue, as nobles and commoners alike sought out Templar physicians for ailments that others could not cure. The grateful patients who recovered from seemingly hopeless conditions under Templar care became some of their most devoted supporters, creating networks of loyalty that extended far beyond the formal boundaries of the order. Kings and queens sought Templar medical advice for everything, from battlefield wounds to mysterious illnesses, and the cures they provided often cemented political alliances that proved crucial to the order's continued expansion and influence. Perhaps most remarkably, the Templars had developed what might be considered the world's first comprehensive intelligence network, a web of information gathering that made modern spy agencies seem primitive by comparison. Their brothers, traveling as merchants, pilgrims, and diplomats, gathered information from every corner of the known world with a thoroughness and efficiency that amazed even those who benefited from their services. They knew of political upheavals before they happened, understood economic trends that wouldn't become apparent to others for months or years, and possessed military intelligence that made them invaluable allies and dangerous enemies to anyone who crossed their path. This information network operated on multiple levels, from simple observation and reporting by individual knights to sophisticated analysis conducted in scriptoriums that rivaled the greatest libraries of their age. Teams of scholar brothers spent their days correlating reports from across the known world, identifying patterns and trends that escaped the notice of other observers, and producing intelligence summaries that gave Templar leaders strategic advantages that seemed almost prescient to their contemporaries. The accuracy of their predictions and the depth of their knowledge about distant events often seemed supernatural to those who dealt with them, leading to rumors that they possessed magical powers of foresight and divination. The architectural marvels that the Templars created during this golden age still inspire wonder today and challenge our understanding of what was possible with medieval technology and knowledge. Their castles in the Holy Land, such as the magnificent fortress at Crac des Chevaliers that dominated the landscape like a mountain of stone and mortar, demonstrated engineering principles that wouldn't be fully understood by mainstream builders for centuries to come. These structures incorporated advanced concepts like concentrated firepower that maximized the effectiveness of defensive weapons, overlapping fields of defense that created killing zones where attackers could be destroyed without risk to defenders, and supply systems that could sustain sieges lasting years rather than months through ingenious water collection and food storage techniques. The Gothic cathedrals that rose across Europe during this period often reflected direct Templar influence, their soaring spires and flying buttresses embodying the same sacred geometry that the Knights had discovered in their ancient texts, while incorporating engineering innovations that made structures of unprecedented size and beauty possible. These buildings were not merely architectural achievements, but spiritual machines designed to elevate human consciousness and create sacred spaces where the divine could more easily touch the earthly realm. The mathematical relationships embedded in their proportions created harmonic resonances that enhanced prayer and meditation, while their orientation and internal geometry channeled cosmic energies in ways that made them powerful centers of spiritual transformation. The Templars' influence on education and learning was equally profound, though carefully concealed from public view to avoid charges of heresy or unauthorized teaching that could have brought them into conflict with church authorities. In their schools, carefully selected students learned not just Latin and theology, as was common in other medieval institutions, but also mathematics, astronomy, natural philosophy, and experimental science at levels that wouldn't be achieved in European universities for generations to come. They preserved classical texts that had been lost elsewhere, translated works from Arabic and Hebrew that contained scientific and philosophical insights far ahead of their time, and developed educational methods that emphasized critical thinking and empirical observation over the rote memorization that characterized most medieval learning. Their libraries contained works that officially didn't exist, books that had been declared heretical by church authorities, but which contained valuable knowledge that the Templars believed was too important to be lost to political considerations. Students in Templar schools learned about the heliocentric model of the solar system centuries before Copernicus, studied principles of physics that wouldn't be formalized until Newton, and explored philosophical ideas that challenged conventional thinking about the nature of reality and humanity's place within it. This educational system produced scholars and thinkers who would go on to influence the development of Renaissance humanism and the scientific revolution, though their connection to Templar teaching was carefully concealed to protect both the students and the order. Their agricultural innovations transformed the European countryside in ways that are often overlooked by historians who focus on military and political achievements, while ignoring the practical improvements that actually improved the lives of ordinary people. Drawing on ancient Roman texts that described advanced farming techniques and Middle Eastern methods that had been developed over millennia of agriculture in challenging environments, they introduced crop rotation methods that dramatically increased yields while preserving soil fertility. Their irrigation systems brought water to previously barren lands. Their livestock breeding programs produced animals that were larger, stronger, and more productive than anything previously known in Europe, and their food preservation techniques ensured that abundance in good years could sustain populations through times of scarcity. Templar estates became models of efficient agricultural management that generated surpluses far beyond what other landowners could achieve, creating wealth that not only funded their military activities, but also provided food security for entire regions during times of famine and hardship. Their farming methods were so successful that other landowners began copying their techniques, leading to agricultural improvements that increased Europe's population and prosperity throughout the High Middle Ages. The agricultural revolution that supported the growth of medieval cities and the expansion of trade would not have been possible without the innovations that the Templars developed and disseminated through their network of estates and commanderies. The financial instruments that the Templars pioneered during this period laid the foundation for the modern banking system and international commerce in ways that are still evident in contemporary financial practices. They created the first traveler's checks that allowed merchants to travel safely without carrying large amounts of precious metals, established standardized exchange rates across different currencies that facilitated international trade, and developed insurance policies that protected merchants against the risks of long-distance commerce through dangerous territories and uncertain political conditions. Their accounting methods, which tracked transactions with unprecedented precision and reliability, allowed them to manage resources across their vast network with an efficiency that wouldn't be matched by secular institutions for centuries to come. The Templar financial system was so reliable and efficient that it became the backbone of European commerce, with their letters of credit being accepted from London to Jerusalem, and their currency exchange services being used by everyone from humble pilgrims to wealthy merchants to kings conducting international negotiations. The trust that people placed in Templar financial services was absolute, based on centuries of reliable performance and the knowledge that the order's resources were so vast that they could honor any commitment they made, regardless of political upheavals or economic disasters that might bankrupt lesser institutions. This financial power made them indispensable to the functioning of medieval society, but it also made them targets for those who envied their wealth and feared their influence. Yet beneath all this visible success lay deeper mysteries that even the most trusted Templar brothers were only partially aware of. Secrets so profound that they were shared only among the highest ranks of the order, and then only after years of preparation and testing to ensure absolute loyalty and discretion. The inner circle of the order, those who had been initiated into the highest levels of their secret knowledge through ceremonies that bound them with oaths stronger than death itself, guarded information that they believed could reshape the world if it were ever fully revealed to those who were not prepared to handle such revolutionary truths. They spoke in coded language even among themselves, using symbols that carried multiple layers of meaning depending on the level of initiation of the listener, and maintained archives that were accessible only to those who had proven their absolute discretion and loyalty through decades of faithful service. These inner teachings dealt with subjects that went far beyond military strategy or financial management, touching on the fundamental nature of reality, the true history of human civilization, and knowledge that could potentially transform human society in ways that most people were not ready to accept or understand. The responsibility of guarding such secrets weighed heavily on those who possessed them, as they understood that premature revelation could lead to chaos and destruction rather than enlightenment and progress. As this golden age reached its zenith in the early 14th century, the Templars had become something unprecedented in human history, a transnational organization that combined military power, financial resources, technological innovation, and esoteric knowledge on a scale that wouldn't be seen again until the modern era of multinational corporations and international intelligence agencies. They were simultaneously the guardians of ancient wisdom and the pioneers of medieval innovation, bridging the gap between the classical world and the emerging Renaissance, while operating according to principles that transcended the limitations of their historical period. Their influence touched every aspect of medieval life, from the castles that protected the Holy Land to the cathedrals that inspired the faithful, from the trade routes that connected distant continents to the universities that preserved and transmitted knowledge. But as any student of history knows, golden ages are often followed by darker times, and the very success that made the Templars indispensable also made them targets for those who feared their power and coveted their wealth. The shadows were already beginning to gather around this mighty order, cast by those who saw their influence as a threat to royal authority and their treasures as a solution to financial problems that plagued kingdoms throughout Europe. As our story moves toward its dramatic climax, we see the forces of envy, greed, and political ambition preparing to strike at an organization that had grown too powerful for its own safety. Sleep peacefully now, dreaming of that golden age when knowledge and mystery walked hand in hand through corridors of power that spanned continents, when warrior monks guarded secrets that could change the world, and used their wisdom to create a network of influence that touched every corner of human civilization. Let your mind drift through those magnificent castles and soaring cathedrals, those busy harbors and prosperous estates where Templar innovation transformed the medieval world and laid the foundations for the modern age. Tomorrow we'll witness the beginning of the end and discover how the Templars' greatest treasures survived the destruction of their order to influence the world in ways that continue to this day. The year 1307 began like any other autumn in the Templar domains, with the soft rustle of falling leaves echoing through courtyards where knights practiced their martial skills with the precision of dancers and the dedication of priests, and scribes bent over manuscripts in peaceful concentration, their quills scratching across parchment as they copied ancient texts and recorded the daily affairs of their vast organization. The morning mist that rose from the Seine carried no hint of the catastrophe that would soon engulf the order like a sudden storm, no whisper of the betrayal that was being planned in the shadowed chambers of the French royal palace, where greed and desperation were forging a conspiracy that would shake the foundations of medieval Europe. Yet by the end of that fateful year, the most powerful organization in medieval Europe would lie in ruins, its members scattered to the winds like autumn leaves before a hurricane, carrying with them secrets that would reshape the hidden currents of history and influence the development of human civilization in ways that are still being discovered today. The destruction of the Templars would mark not just the end of an era, but the beginning of a new chapter in the hidden history of human knowledge, as the guardians of ancient wisdom were forced to abandon their traditional structures and find new ways to preserve the treasures they had spent centuries accumulating and protecting. King Philip IV of France, known to history as Philip the Fair, though his fairness extended only to his physical appearance and not to his character or actions, faced a crisis that threatened to topple his kingdom and destroy everything he had worked to build during his reign. His wars against England and Flanders had drained the royal treasury like a wound that would not heal. His debts to the Templars had grown to astronomical proportions that seemed to increase with each passing month, regardless of what payments he made, and his subjects groaned under the weight of taxes that seemed to increase with each passing season as he desperately sought new sources of revenue to fund his ambitions. In the quiet hours before dawn, as he walked the corridors of his palace with footsteps that echoed like a death knell through the empty halls, Philip hatched a plan that was as brilliant as it was ruthless, a strategy that would solve his financial problems while eliminating the one organization that possessed enough power to challenge his authority and enough knowledge to expose his weaknesses. The plan required perfect timing, absolute secrecy, and the cooperation of the Church. But if successful, it would deliver into his hands not only the vast wealth of the Templars, but also eliminate the only institution in Europe that could rival royal power. The king's strategy demonstrated a level of political sophistication that revealed why he had been able to dominate European politics for so long despite his financial difficulties. Working in secret with Pope Clement V, a weak pontiff who owed his position to French influence and who could be manipulated through a combination of threats and promises, Philip prepared a coordinated strike that would catch the Templars completely off guard, despite their vast intelligence network and their reputation for political awareness. The conspiracy was planned with military precision, involving careful coordination between royal officials, church authorities, and local nobles who had been promised shares of the expected spoils. Letters were sent in sealed pouches to royal officials throughout France, each one containing the same terrible instructions written in the king's own hand and sealed with his personal seal to prevent any possibility of forgery or misunderstanding. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, every Templar in the kingdom was to be arrested simultaneously on charges of heresy, blasphemy, idol worship, sodomy, and other unspeakable crimes against God and nature that would justify not only their arrest but also the confiscation of all their property and possessions. The charges were carefully crafted to ensure that no one would dare defend the accused, combining religious outrage with sexual scandal in a way that would make public support for the Templars impossible regardless of their previous reputation for piety and service. But the Templars were not entirely unprepared for this betrayal, despite the shock and surprise that would characterize their initial response to the coordinated arrests. Their intelligence network, that vast web of information that spanned continents and reached into every royal court and ecclesiastical council in Europe, had detected whispers of danger floating like storm clouds on the political horizon for months before the actual strike came. Strange meetings in the royal palace, unusual correspondence between the king and his agents, and subtle changes in the behavior of court officials had all been noted and reported by Templar observers who had been trained to recognize the signs of impending political upheaval. In the weeks leading up to that fateful Friday, strange activities were observed at Templar commanderies throughout Europe that suggested some members of the order had received advance warning of what was coming. Ox carts departed in the middle of the night, their wheels muffled with cloth to deaden their sound, and their destinations unknown even to the local brothers who helped load their mysterious cargo. Ships left harbor under cover of darkness with their manifests mysteriously absent from port records, and their captains tight-lipped about their destinations, while trusted agents of the order began disappearing from their usual haunts without explanation or farewell. Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Temple, was not the doddering old man that French propaganda would later paint him as in their efforts to justify his destruction. He was a seasoned warrior and administrator who had spent decades managing the Order's vast resources and protecting its most precious secrets through years of political turmoil and military challenges that would have destroyed lesser men. When the signs of impending disaster became undeniable, he activated protocols that had been developed over 2 centuries of careful planning, contingency measures designed to preserve the Order's most valuable assets in the event of catastrophic persecution that threatened their very existence. These protocols had been refined through years of experience with smaller-scale persecution and political attacks, creating a sophisticated system for protecting Templar assets and knowledge that could be implemented quickly and efficiently when circumstances demanded. The system involved multiple layers of security, redundant storage facilities, and networks of trusted allies who could provide sanctuary and assistance without being directly connected to the Order in ways that would make them obvious targets for persecution. Most importantly, the protocols distinguished between different types of assets, ensuring that the most precious and irreplaceable treasures would receive priority protection even if material wealth had to be sacrificed. The Templar treasure that disappeared in those final weeks was not simply gold and silver, though contemporary accounts suggest that wagon loads of precious metals vanished from their treasuries like morning mist before the sun, leaving behind vaults that had been filled to overflowing just days before. More importantly, the great libraries that contained centuries of accumulated knowledge were evacuated with the efficiency of a military operation conducted by men who understood that they were preserving humanity's greatest treasures against an age of darkness and ignorance that might last for centuries. Ancient texts that contained the wisdom of civilizations that had vanished before Rome was founded, astronomical instruments that could predict celestial events with accuracy that would not be matched for centuries, maps showing trade routes to distant lands that official history insisted were unknown, architectural plans encoded with sacred geometry that could transform stone and mortar into gateways to the divine, and alchemical formulas that had taken generations to perfect. All of these vanished into hiding places that had been prepared for just such an emergency. The evacuation was conducted with such thoroughness and efficiency that when the king's agents finally gained access to Templar treasuries, they found empty chambers that showed no sign of where their contents had gone. The Templar fleet, one of the most advanced naval forces of its time and a crucial component of their international operations, simply disappeared from European waters with a completeness that suggested careful planning rather than panicked flight. Ships that had been anchored in the harbor of La Rochelle on Thursday evening were gone by Friday dawn, along with their crews and whatever precious cargo they carried, vanishing so completely that no trace of them could be found despite extensive searches by royal agents who scoured every port from Scotland to Spain. The disappearance was so total and so well coordinated that it could only have been the result of long-standing contingency plans that had been kept secret even from most members of the Order. Some of these vessels sailed north to Scotland, where Robert the Bruce, himself excommunicated and therefore hostile to papal authority, offered sanctuary to the persecuted knights in exchange for their military expertise and support in his ongoing struggle for independence from English domination. Others headed west into the Atlantic, following sea routes that official history claims were unknown for another 2 centuries, but which the Templars had been using for decades to maintain their secret trading posts and exploration bases in distant lands. The exact destinations of these ships remain unknown to this day, though evidence suggests that some may have reached the Americas, others may have established bases in Africa or Asia, and still others may have found sanctuary in remote islands where their descendants continued to guard Templar secrets for generations. In Portugal, where the Templars had established some of their most important outposts and developed their most advanced maritime technologies, King Dinas defied papal pressure and refused to arrest the knights despite threats of excommunication and political isolation. Instead, he created a new order, the Order of Christ, that conveniently absorbed all the Templar properties, personnel, and presumably their secrets as well in a legal fiction that allowed the continuation of Templar activities under a different name and with royal protection. This continuation of Templar influence under a different guise would later play a crucial role in the Portuguese age of exploration, as navigators trained in Templar maritime traditions opened sea routes to Africa, Asia, and the New World using knowledge and techniques that had been preserved from the original order. The interrogations and trials that followed the arrests revealed the remarkable discipline of the Templar Brotherhood and the depth of their commitment to protecting the secrets they had been entrusted to guard. Despite facing torture that would break most men and interrogation techniques that had been refined through years of experience with other religious minorities, the captured knights maintained their silence about the Order's deepest secrets with a consistency that amazed even their torturers. They might confess to invented heresies to stop the pain. They might admit to practices that had never occurred, but they never revealed the locations of the hidden treasures or the nature of the knowledge they had spent their lives protecting. This silence, maintained even unto death by men who faced the flames with dignity and courage that impressed even their enemies, suggests that what they guarded was far more valuable than any material wealth and far more dangerous than any political secret. The knowledge they protected was clearly so important that they were willing to endure any suffering rather than allow it to fall into the wrong hands, and so powerful that its revelation could have consequences that extended far beyond their own personal fate or the survival of their order. Their silence in the face of torture became itself a testimony to the extraordinary nature of what they had discovered in those ancient chambers beneath Jerusalem. In England, Edward II initially resisted French pressure to arrest the Templars, giving the English members of the order precious time to implement their own evacuation plans and protect their most valuable assets from confiscation. When arrests finally came, many of the most important Templars had simply vanished along with the contents of their treasuries and libraries, disappearing so completely that royal agents found empty buildings and abandoned properties that showed no sign of where their occupants had gone. The underground vaults beneath the Temple Church in London, once filled with royal treasures and Templar secrets, were found mysteriously empty, their contents spirited away to hiding places that remain unknown to this day, despite centuries of searching by treasure hunters and historians. Scotland became a particularly important refuge for fleeing Templars, as Robert the Bruce's political situation made him a natural ally for anyone who was being persecuted by the Church or by the French king, who supported his English enemies. The Scottish king welcomed the warrior monks as valuable allies in his fight for independence, providing them with new identities and protecting them from the papal agents who sought to track down and arrest every member of the disbanded order. At the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, mysterious knights bearing no identifying banners appeared at a crucial moment to help secure Scottish victory, and many historians believe these were Templar refugees, using their military expertise to aid their protector while maintaining their anonymity. The fate of the Order's most precious relics remains one of history's greatest mysteries, a puzzle that has inspired countless expeditions and investigations, but which continues to resist solution despite the application of modern technology and archaeological techniques. Some scholars believe that the legendary Templar treasure included artifacts of immense religious significance, perhaps fragments of the True Cross that had been discovered in their excavations, relics of Christ himself that had been hidden in the depths beneath Jerusalem, or even the Holy Grail that features so prominently in medieval legends, and which may have been based on actual discoveries made by the knights. If such items existed, they would have been among the first to be hidden when danger threatened, spirited away to sanctuaries where they could await more favorable times and more worthy guardians who could appreciate their true significance. These relics, if they existed, would have been far more than mere historical curiosities. They would have been tangible connections to the divine that could serve as focal points for spiritual practices and sources of power that transcended anything known to conventional religion. Their protection would have justified any sacrifice, any suffering, any loss that the order might endure in the course of their persecution. The architectural plans and engineering knowledge that had enabled the Templars to build some of the world's most impressive structures did not disappear with the Order's destruction, but passed into the hands of master craftsmen and builders who carried it forward into new organizations and different contexts. The explosion of Gothic cathedral construction that continued throughout the 14th century shows clear signs of Templar influence, as do the great castles and civic buildings that rose across Europe in the following centuries, incorporating design principles and construction techniques that had been developed in Templar workshops and scriptoriums. The knowledge was preserved and transmitted through guilds and brotherhoods that maintained the traditions while carefully concealing their original source to protect themselves from persecution. The financial innovations pioneered by the Templars similarly survived their order's demise, passed on to Italian banking houses and Flemish merchants who had learned their techniques through decades of commercial interaction and who understood the value of the systems that had made the Templars so successful in international trade. The Medici Bank, which would later dominate European finance during the Renaissance, employed accounting methods and commercial instruments that bore striking similarities to Templar practices, while the great trading companies that would drive European expansion in the following centuries used organizational structures and business models that showed clear influence from Templar precedents. The Protestant work ethic that would drive Northern European prosperity in later centuries showed clear influences from Templar organizational principles and economic theories that emphasized the spiritual value of productive labor. Perhaps most intriguingly, the esoteric knowledge that the Templars had guarded so carefully began to surface in new forms during the centuries following their destruction, appearing in contexts that suggested the survival of hidden teaching traditions that had been passed down through secret networks of initiates. The Renaissance fascination with classical learning, the scientific revolution's emphasis on empirical observation, and the emergence of secret societies dedicated to preserving ancient wisdom all showed traces of Templar influence that could be detected by those who knew what to look for. Groups like the Rosicrucians and later the Freemasons claimed direct descent from the persecuted knights, and while such claims are difficult to verify historically, the knowledge they preserved often showed remarkable similarities to what we know of Templar interests and discoveries. As Jacques de Molay faced his execution in 1314, standing with dignity on that small island in the Seine, where the flames would consume his earthly form, while his spirit soared free of earthly constraints, he may have taken comfort in knowing that the true treasures of his order had survived the destruction that claimed his life. The gold and silver might have been seized by greedy kings, the properties might have been confiscated by corrupt officials, but the knowledge, the wisdom, and the spiritual insights that represented the order's greatest wealth had been scattered to the winds like seeds that would sprout in new soil and bear fruit in future seasons when the world was ready to receive them. The smoke that rose from the pyre that consumed the last Grand Master carried with it not just the end of an order, but the beginning of a new chapter in the hidden history of human knowledge, a chapter that would be written by the scattered survivors who had pledged their lives to preserving what their brothers had died to protect. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the firelight, Templar refugees watched the flames and made silent vows to preserve what they had inherited from their fallen brothers, swearing oaths that bound them more strongly than steel, and committing themselves to a mission that would extend far beyond their own lifetimes. These men, stripped of their identities and forced to adopt new names and new lives, became the guardians of secrets that would influence the course of human civilization for centuries to come, carrying forward traditions that would emerge in new forms and inspire new movements when the time was right for their revelation. Their sacrifice ensured that the light of ancient wisdom would not be extinguished, but would continue to burn in hidden places, waiting for the right moment to illuminate the world once more with knowledge that could transform human understanding and open new possibilities for spiritual and intellectual development. Close your eyes now and imagine those faithful guardians carrying their precious burdens through the darkness toward destinations known only to themselves, their hearts heavy with loss, but their spirits strengthened by the knowledge that they carried hope for the future. Their sacrifice ensured that the greatest treasures of human civilization would survive the dark age that was descending upon Europe, preserved in secret places where they could wait for more enlightened times when wisdom would be valued more than gold and knowledge would be treasured more than power. In the gentle twilight of our story, as the last echoes of medieval bells fade into the mists of time and the shadows of ancient castles stretch across landscapes that have witnessed the rise and fall of empires, we find ourselves standing at the threshold between legend and reality, where the treasures of the Knights Templar continue to influence our world in ways both visible and hidden, their legacy woven so deeply into the fabric of human civilization that most people never realize how profoundly their daily lives are shaped by innovations and insights that originated in those candle-lit chambers beneath Jerusalem 8 centuries ago. The candle flames that once illuminated manuscript pages in Templar scriptoriums have been replaced by electric lights in modern laboratories, yet the search for their lost secrets continues with undiminished intensity, drawing researchers, treasure hunters, historians, archaeologists, and spiritual seekers into a mystery that spans 8 centuries and touches every aspect of human knowledge and achievement. Each new generation discovers the Templars anew, finding in their story reflections of contemporary concerns about power, knowledge, spirituality, and the eternal human quest for meaning that transcends the limitations of any single historical period. The physical treasures of the Templars, those wagon loads of gold and silver that vanished in the weeks before their arrest like morning mist before the rising sun, remain tantalizingly elusive despite centuries of searching by individuals and organizations that have invested enormous resources in attempts to locate and recover them. The mystery has inspired countless expeditions, from amateur treasure hunters armed with metal detectors to sophisticated archaeological teams using the most advanced technology available. Yet, the ultimate fate of the Templar treasure remains as enigmatic today as it was on that October morning in 1307, when the king's agents discovered empty vaults where immense wealth had been stored just days before. In 1795, diggers on Oak Island off the coast of Nova Scotia discovered what appeared to be an elaborate system of flood tunnels protecting something of enormous value buried deep beneath the earth in a construction project that demonstrated engineering sophistication far beyond what should have been possible for any group operating in that remote location during the medieval period. The engineering sophistication of these defenses, involving precise calculations of water pressure and tidal flows that required advanced mathematical knowledge, bears striking similarities to the construction techniques that the Templars had mastered during their golden age, when they built fortifications that amazed contemporary observers with their strength and ingenuity. Despite millions of dollars invested in excavation efforts over more than 2 centuries, involving everything from simple shovels to sophisticated drilling equipment that can penetrate hundreds of feet into the earth, whatever lies at the bottom of that mysterious shaft continues to elude discovery, protected by flood systems that activate automatically whenever anyone attempts to reach the deepest levels of the construction. The very persistence of these protective mechanisms, after so many centuries, suggests that whoever built them possessed not only advanced engineering knowledge, but also resources and determination that point to an organization of extraordinary capabilities and long-term vision. In the rolling hills of Scotland, where Templar refugees once found sanctuary among people who understood the value of resistance against overwhelming odds, Rosslyn Chapel stands as a testament to the survival of their esoteric knowledge and their influence on subsequent generations of builders and craftsmen. Built in the 15th century by the Sinclair family, who had close connections to the exiled knights and who may have served as guardians of some of their most precious secrets, this extraordinary structure incorporates symbolic elements that seem to encode advanced astronomical, mathematical, and theological concepts that were far ahead of their time. The chapel's famous apprentice pillar displays spiral patterns that mirror DNA structures centuries before the discovery of genetics, while its ceiling depicts star configurations that suggest knowledge of celestial mechanics far in advance of contemporary understanding, as if the builders had access to astronomical knowledge that wouldn't be officially discovered for centuries. The building itself seems to serve as a three-dimensional encyclopedia, its stones carved with symbols and scenes that tell a story extending far beyond conventional Christian imagery to incorporate elements from many different spiritual and intellectual traditions. Every surface of the chapel bears carvings that reward careful study, from depictions of plants that weren't supposed to exist in Europe at the time of construction, to astronomical symbols that reflect knowledge of celestial mechanics that official history claims was unknown in medieval Scotland. The mathematical relationships built into the structure's proportions create harmonic resonances that enhance meditation and prayer, while the positioning and orientation of the building demonstrate understanding of geomantic principles that connect earthly architecture to cosmic forces in ways that modern science is only beginning to understand. The influence of Templar architectural wisdom can be traced through the great building projects of the Renaissance and beyond, creating a continuous thread of knowledge that connects ancient discoveries to modern achievements in ways that are often invisible to casual observation, but which become apparent to those who understand what to look for. When Christopher Wren rebuilt London's churches after the Great Fire of 1666, his designs incorporated proportional relationships and symbolic elements that showed clear connections to the sacred geometry that the Templars had preserved from their ancient discoveries, creating buildings that served not just as places of worship, but as instruments of spiritual transformation. The dome of St. Paul's Cathedral, with its precise mathematical relationships and acoustic properties that seem almost supernatural in their perfection, reflects knowledge that had been passed down through generations of master builders who traced their teachings back to the persecuted knights through an unbroken chain of instruction and initiation. The building's proportions create harmonic resonances that enhance the human voice and make music more beautiful, while its geometry channels natural energies in ways that create an atmosphere of transcendence and spiritual elevation that affects everyone who enters the space. The great explorers of the Age of Discovery carried with them navigational techniques and geographical knowledge that bore the unmistakable stamp of Templar influence, using methods and information that had been preserved through centuries of persecution and secrecy. Vasco da Gama's route to India followed sea lanes that Portuguese Templars had mapped centuries earlier, using knowledge inherited from ancient sources, while Columbus's discovery of America may have been guided by charts that showed lands across the Western Ocean long before his famous voyage, maps that had been carefully guarded by those who understood their true value. The mysterious Piri race map of 1513, which accurately depicts the coastlines of Antarctica centuries before that continent was officially discovered by explorers who are credited with its finding, suggests the survival of ancient geographical knowledge that could only have been preserved by organizations with the resources and motivation to maintain such secrets across generations of political upheaval and social change. This map, along with other similar documents that occasionally surface in private collections or monastic libraries, points to the existence of a hidden tradition of geographical knowledge that paralleled but remained separate from official exploration and discovery. In the laboratories and workshops of Renaissance scientists and inventors, we find echoes of the alchemical and technological knowledge that the Templars had accumulated during their years of power, influences that shaped the development of empirical science and technological innovation in ways that are rarely acknowledged in conventional histories of scientific progress. Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks contain engineering designs and scientific observations that seem impossibly advanced for his time, leading some researchers to speculate that he had access to technical manuals and scientific texts that had been hidden since the fall of the Order and preserved by secret networks of scholars and craftsmen. His flying machines, with their sophisticated understanding of aerodynamics and lift principles, his hydraulic pumps that demonstrated knowledge of fluid mechanics that wouldn't be formalized for centuries, and his military devices that incorporated principles of metallurgy and engineering that were far ahead of contemporary practice, all show understanding of scientific principles that suggests access to knowledge sources that weren't available to other scholars of his time. The diversity and sophistication of his interests, spanning everything from anatomy to astronomy, from geology to engineering, reflects the kind of comprehensive education that had been characteristic of Templar schools rather than the more limited curriculum available in conventional medieval universities. The banking innovations that transformed European commerce during the Renaissance can be traced directly to practices that the Templars had pioneered in their medieval financial network, creating continuities that connect ancient innovations to modern financial systems in ways that demonstrate the persistent influence of Templar ideas across centuries of political and social change. The Medici Bank of Florence, which became the financial powerhouse of the 15th century and enabled the Renaissance flowering of art and culture, employed accounting methods, credit instruments, and international exchange systems that were virtually identical to those developed by the Templars 3 centuries earlier. When Jacob Fugger created the first international banking empire in the early 16th century, establishing financial networks that spanned Europe and connected to trade routes extending to Asia and Africa, he used organizational structures and business practices that bore unmistakable similarities to the Templar model of combining religious dedication with commercial acumen. The success of these Renaissance banking houses depended not just on their financial innovations, but also on their ability to maintain trust and reliability across vast distances and political boundaries, qualities that had been hallmarks of Templar operations and which required the same kind of institutional culture and spiritual discipline that had characterized the medieval order. The Protestant Reformation, which shattered the religious unity of medieval Europe and created new forms of spiritual expression that emphasized individual experience over institutional authority, was supported by economic and philosophical arguments that showed clear Templar influence transmitted through hidden channels of intellectual transmission. Martin Luther's emphasis on individual spiritual experience over ecclesiastical authority echoed themes that had appeared in the mystical texts that the Templars had preserved from their ancient discoveries, while his challenge to papal supremacy reflected political ideas that had been developed in the democratic structures of Templar commanderies. The work ethic that drove Protestant societies toward unprecedented prosperity reflected organizational principles that the Templars had developed in their commanderies, where prayer and productive labor were seen as equally important expressions of divine service, and where the accumulation of wealth was justified as a means of serving God and advancing human knowledge. This fusion of spiritual discipline with commercial success became a defining characteristic of Protestant culture and contributed to the economic expansion that made possible the scientific revolution and the age of exploration. The emergence of secret societies in the 17th and 18th centuries provided new vessels for preserving and transmitting the knowledge that had once been guarded in Templar archives, creating organizational structures that could protect ancient wisdom while adapting to changing political and social conditions. The Freemasons, who claimed direct descent from the medieval knights through an unbroken chain of initiation extending back to the original builders of Solomon's Temple, incorporated into their rituals and teachings many of the symbols, geometric principles, and philosophical concepts that had characterized Templar initiation ceremonies and inner teachings. The Masonic emphasis on sacred geometry, their use of architectural symbolism to convey spiritual truths, and their organization into degrees of initiation that gradually revealed higher levels of knowledge, all reflected Templar precedents and suggested the survival of educational traditions that had been developed in the medieval commanderies. The international character of Freemasonry, which transcended national boundaries and religious differences, echoed the universal vision that had characterized the Templars at their height and which had enabled them to operate effectively across the diverse political and cultural landscape of medieval Europe. The Rosicrucians, with their emphasis on ancient wisdom and spiritual transformation achieved through the study of natural philosophy and hermetic arts, preserved alchemical and mystical traditions that showed remarkable similarities to what we know of Templar inner teachings and esoteric practices. Their manifestos, which appeared in early 17th century Europe and caused a sensation throughout the intellectual community, claimed to represent a brotherhood of illuminated individuals who possessed the keys to both spiritual and material transformation through the application of hidden knowledge that had been preserved since ancient times. During the Enlightenment, as European thinkers began to challenge traditional authorities and embrace empirical investigation as the path to truth and progress, they drew on intellectual traditions that could be traced back to the Templar emphasis on observation and experimentation that had characterized their approach to both natural philosophy and spiritual development. Isaac Newton's mathematical description of universal gravitation employed geometric principles that had been encoded in Gothic cathedrals centuries before his birth, while his alchemical researches reflected the same fusion of spiritual quest and material investigation that had characterized Templar natural philosophy. The scientific method itself, with its emphasis on hypothesis formation, careful observation, controlled experimentation, and verification through repetition, reflected approaches to knowledge that the Templars had developed in their quest to understand both natural and supernatural phenomena through systematic investigation rather than reliance on inherited authority. The Royal Society of London, founded in the 17th century to promote experimental philosophy and scientific discovery, operated according to principles of international cooperation and open inquiry that echoed Templar organizational methods and educational philosophies. The democratic revolutions that swept across Europe and America in the 18th and 19th centuries were inspired by political theories that showed clear connections to Templar organizational principles and concepts of governance that had been developed in the medieval commanderies, where authority was based on merit and service rather than inherited position. The concept of individual rights balanced against collective responsibility, the separation of powers within government to prevent tyranny and corruption, and the idea that political authority must be earned rather than inherited, all reflected ideas that had been developed in institutions where knight brothers had governed themselves according to rules that balanced personal autonomy with communal obligation. The American Constitution, with its system of checks and balances and its emphasis on religious freedom and individual rights, reflected political principles that had been pioneered in organizations that operated according to democratic principles while maintaining strong central coordination and clear lines of authority and responsibility. Many of the founding fathers were Freemasons who had been influenced by traditions that traced their origins back to medieval organizations like the Templars, and their vision of a society based on reason, tolerance, and individual merit reflected ideals that had been preserved through centuries of political persecution and social upheaval. In the industrial age, as steam engines and factories transformed human civilization and created unprecedented opportunities for both progress and exploitation, the engineering knowledge that powered this revolution drew on technical traditions that could be traced back through generations of master craftsmen to the original Templar builders who had incorporated advanced principles into their castles and churches. The great railway bridges and tunnel systems of the 19th century employed structural principles that had been encoded in the design of Templar fortifications centuries earlier, while the precision manufacturing techniques that made mass production possible reflected mathematical and engineering knowledge that had been preserved in guild traditions descended from Templar workshops. The Industrial Revolution's emphasis on systematic organization and efficient management reflected organizational principles that had been developed in Templar commanderies, where large-scale operations had been coordinated across vast geographical areas through careful planning and standardized procedures that ensured consistent quality and reliable performance. The concept of the corporation as a legal entity that could transcend the lives of its individual members and accumulate resources for long-term projects reflected organizational innovations that had been pioneered by religious orders like the Templars, who had operated according to principles that balanced individual dedication with institutional permanence. Modern archaeological discoveries continue to reveal new aspects of the Templar legacy and provide evidence for theories about their knowledge and activities that had previously been dismissed as speculative or legendary. In 1945, the Nag Hammadi Library was discovered in Egypt, containing Gnostic texts that show remarkable similarities to the mystical traditions that the Templars are believed to have preserved, including Gospels and philosophical works that present alternative versions of Christian history and theology that had been suppressed by Orthodox authorities. The Dead Sea Scrolls, found in the caves of Qumran starting in 1947, include astronomical and mathematical texts that match descriptions of documents that the Templars reportedly discovered in their Jerusalem excavations, providing evidence that sophisticated scientific knowledge had indeed been preserved in the region where the Knights conducted their mysterious researches. These finds suggest that the knowledge traditions preserved by the Templars were part of a much larger stream of ancient wisdom that had been hidden from mainstream history for centuries, waiting for rediscovery when human civilization was ready to receive and understand their implications. The computer age has brought new tools to the search for Templar treasures and has revealed previously hidden aspects of their legacy that demonstrate the sophisticated nature of their knowledge and the extent of their influence on subsequent developments in human civilization. Satellite imagery reveals previously unknown structures and archaeological sites that show evidence of construction techniques and organizational principles characteristic of Templar operations, while ground-penetrating radar uncovers hidden chambers beneath ancient buildings that may contain treasures that have been waiting for centuries to be rediscovered. Digital analysis of medieval manuscripts has revealed layers of encoded information that earlier scholars could never have detected, suggesting that the Templars embedded their secrets in ways that would only become apparent when technology advanced sufficiently to decode them, creating time-release mechanisms that would protect sensitive knowledge until humanity was ready to receive it. Computer modeling of Gothic cathedral structures has revealed mathematical relationships and acoustic properties that demonstrate levels of architectural sophistication that require knowledge of physics and engineering principles that weren't supposed to be available to medieval builders. The Internet itself, with its decentralized structure and emphasis on information sharing across geographical and political boundaries, reflects organizational principles that the Templars had pioneered in their international network of commanderies, where knowledge was freely shared among initiates regardless of their national origins or cultural backgrounds. The concept of networked intelligence, where individual nodes contribute to collective knowledge that exceeds the capabilities of any single component, echoes the Templar model of distributed authority and shared responsibility that had enabled them to operate effectively across the diverse political landscape of medieval Europe. Contemporary financial institutions continue to employ practices that originated in Templar banking houses, creating continuities that connect medieval innovations to modern global commerce in ways that demonstrate the enduring relevance of organizational principles developed 8 centuries ago. The concept of international credit that allows resources to be transferred instantly across vast distances, the use of electronic systems to move money without the physical transportation of precious metals, and the development of complex financial instruments that facilitate global trade all have their roots in innovations that the Templars developed to manage their medieval empire. The Swiss banking system, with its emphasis on secrecy and security, that has made it a haven for those seeking to protect their wealth from political instability and economic uncertainty, reflects traditions that can be traced back to the discreet financial services that the Templars provided to medieval royalty, and which earned them a reputation for absolute reliability and confidentiality that survived even their destruction as an organization. The modern concept of banking confidentiality as a fundamental right that protects individual privacy and financial security has its origins in principles that were established by religious orders that understood the importance of trust and discretion in financial relationships. In the realm of space exploration, as humanity reaches toward the stars in fulfillment of dreams that have inspired the human imagination since ancient times, we employ navigational techniques and astronomical knowledge that had been preserved in traditions that descended from Templar scholars who studied the heavens with instruments and methods far in advance of their time. The mathematical principles that guide spacecraft to distant planets were first encoded in the sacred geometry that the Templars used to design their churches and castles, while the international cooperation that makes modern space missions possible reflects organizational models that the Templars had pioneered in their multinational military and commercial operations. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence, which represents humanity's quest to discover whether we are alone in the universe, employs radio telescopes and computer systems that analyze electromagnetic signals using mathematical principles that were first developed by ancient astronomers, whose knowledge was preserved by organizations like the Templars through centuries of political upheaval and social change. The very concept of systematic scientific investigation of cosmic phenomena reflects approaches to knowledge that had been developed by medieval scholars who combined spiritual quests with empirical observation in their efforts to understand the nature of reality and humanity's place within the cosmic order. Even in the digital age, the search for Templar treasures continues with undiminished intensity, utilizing new technologies and methodologies that would have seemed like magic to medieval observers, but which represent the natural evolution of investigative techniques that had their origins in the systematic approaches to knowledge that characterized Templar research and scholarship. Blockchain technology has enabled new forms of encrypted communication that echo the coded messages that Templar agents once used to coordinate their activities across continents, while cryptocurrency systems employ mathematical principles that show surprising similarities to the numerical codes that the Templars used to protect their most sensitive information from unauthorized access. Virtual reality environments allow researchers to explore reconstructed Templar sites and experiment with archaeological theories in ways that would have been impossible just decades ago, creating new possibilities for understanding how these medieval structures were designed and what purposes they may have served beyond their obvious military and religious functions. Artificial intelligence systems can analyze vast databases of historical documents and archaeological evidence to identify patterns and connections that human researchers might miss, revealing previously hidden relationships between Templar activities and subsequent historical developments that suggest levels of influence and planning that exceed even the most generous estimates of their capabilities. The greatest treasure of the Knights Templar, however, may not be any physical artifact or accumulation of material wealth, but rather the idea that knowledge itself is sacred and must be preserved at all costs, regardless of the personal sacrifices required of those who take upon themselves the responsibility of guardianship. Throughout history, in times of war and persecution, in periods of ignorance and fanaticism, when the forces of darkness seem to overwhelm the light of learning and understanding, there have always been individuals and organizations willing to risk everything to preserve the accumulated wisdom of humanity for future generations who might be better able to appreciate and utilize it. The Templars were perhaps the first to organize this preservation effort on a truly international scale, creating networks and traditions that have survived the rise and fall of empires, and which continue to operate in forms that adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining their essential commitment to protecting and transmitting knowledge that could benefit all humanity. Their legacy reminds us that civilization is fragile, and that the knowledge that makes progress possible must be actively protected against forces that would destroy it out of ignorance, fear, or the desire to maintain power through the suppression of truth and learning. As we reach the end of our gentle journey through the mysteries of Templar treasures, we find ourselves not at a conclusion, but at a threshold where past and future meet in the eternal present of human consciousness. The secrets that 9 humble knights began to uncover beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem nearly 9 centuries ago continue to influence our world in ways both obvious and subtle. From the credit cards we use daily to the Gothic cathedrals that inspire our souls, from the scientific methods that expand our understanding to the democratic principles that govern our societies. Every time we navigate by the stars using instruments and techniques that trace their origins to ancient knowledge, every time we marvel at architectural achievements that incorporate principles of sacred geometry discovered in hidden chambers beneath Jerusalem, every time we pursue knowledge for its own sake rather than for immediate practical benefit, we participate in traditions that were shaped by the legacy of the Knights Templar and which connect us to an unbroken chain of seekers who have dedicated their lives to understanding the mysteries of existence. Their true treasure was not gold or silver, not precious jewels or sacred relics, though these material things certainly existed and may yet be discovered in hiding places that have protected them for centuries, but rather the understanding that wisdom is humanity's greatest inheritance and must be protected, preserved, and passed on to future generations, regardless of the cost in personal sacrifice or institutional survival. In libraries and laboratories, in universities and workshops, in the quiet corners where scholars pursue their research and artists create beauty from inspiration, The spirit of the Templars lives on in everyone who believes that knowledge and truth are worth any sacrifice required to preserve them. Their white mantles may have been discarded centuries ago when persecution forced them to abandon their visible identity and adopt new forms of organization, but their dedication to knowledge, their commitment to truth, and their willingness to sacrifice everything for the greater good continue to inspire those who carry forward the ancient quest for understanding that connects all seekers across the barriers of time and culture. In every act of learning, in every moment of discovery, in every decision to preserve knowledge rather than destroy it, we honor their memory and continue their mission in forms that they could never have imagined, but which fulfill the same essential purpose that drove their original quest. Sleep now, gentle listener, and dream of those timeless guardians who preserved the light of knowledge through the darkest periods of human history, who sacrificed their lives and their organizational identity to ensure that wisdom would survive the forces of ignorance and destruction that periodically threaten to overwhelm human civilization. In your dreams, you may glimpse the true treasure of the Templars, not material wealth that can be stolen or destroyed, but the eternal flame of human curiosity and wisdom that burns as brightly today as it did in the candle-lit chambers of medieval commanderies, where devoted scholars bent over ancient texts and worked to decode the secrets of the universe. And when you wake, remember that you too are part of this great chain of knowledge, a guardian of wisdom in your own right, carrying forward the precious legacy that the Knights Templar died to protect, and which continues to enrich human civilization through every generation that values learning over ignorance, truth over deception, and wisdom over mere power. The greatest treasure they left us is not hidden in some distant vault waiting to be discovered, but lives within every person who believes that knowledge is sacred and that the quest for understanding is the highest calling of the human spirit. May your dreams be filled with the soft whisper of turning pages, the gentle glow of ancient wisdom illuminating modern understanding, and the peaceful certainty that some treasures are truly eternal because they live not in any material form, but in the continuing quest for knowledge that defines the best of human nature and which connects us across all barriers of time and space to those who have walked this path before us, and to those who will follow in generations yet to come.